Okay, glad to see everybody here. I'm here to talk about building an effective and productive committee. And at first glance, you may say, productive and effective and committee, do they belong in the same sentence? And I guess the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes not so much. So I'm going to give you a few ideas on how I think committees should work and how I think they should run. And I'll start out with sort of a depressing quote, but it's a really apropos one from Alistair McKenzie. And he had a very dim view of committees. So he said, the history of most golf clubs is that a committee is appointed, they make mistakes, and just as they're beginning to learn from these mistakes, they resign office and are replaced by others who make still greater mistakes, and so on it goes. This is the genesis of Frog Rocks, I suspect. So hopefully your committee's not like that, but it can be. And we've all seen instances where clubs were held back. You know, advancement of turf programs, of golf course evolution was held back by committees, and lots of other examples where they were moved forward. And so I think before you talk about committees, you know, you have to ask yourself, what's the ultimate goal? You know, I would say that, you know, a good blend of playability and reliability mixed in with sustainability and golfer satisfaction are probably a reasonable target, but you have to throw in the caveat that, you know, that all has to be done under strict budget guidelines. And so what's possible in one course isn't always possible in another. Now, some people will look at it as an opportunity to make changes when they get on a committee. Others will look at it as a chore. I would think of it as an honor. And this is really the reason why. It's because you're overseeing the most important asset at the club, and you have an opportunity to make positive change or keep positive change going. So it's an incredibly important responsibility. I think it can be a lot of fun, but it takes work, and it takes work to make it fun. So it's a very important position. So here's a statement that was made by past president of the USGA, Richard Tufts. He was very instrumental in starting the course consulting service. But his point was, you know, your job as a green committee member is to serve your fellow golfers while maintaining the type of course the majority of them want. Sounds pretty simple on the surface, but we know golfers, right? What golfers want? Well, half of them don't have a clue as to what they want. The other half, well, they want different things, and both groups change their minds all the time, so you never know if you're getting Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. And what many of them want probably is impossible, at least under current guidelines of their budget, or it just may not be appropriate based on their golf course or their budget. So it's easy to see that this golfer needs something very different in terms of playability and maintenance of the golf course than this group of very elite golfers. Actually, that's the wrong picture. That's the elite golfer. This is the bogey group, okay? And the point here is that this is what most of the golfers are at your golf course, unless you have an extraordinary facility with, you know, preponderance of really low handicappers. Most golfers aren't as good as they think they are, and most aren't really that good. They're bogey plus players. So if you're trying to produce conditions for this person, you know, realistically, has he ever and will he ever or his ilk play your golf course? For most of us, the answer is probably no. So this is a key point. You know, a tough layout that's a challenge to the expert just isn't going to be a lot of fun for the average golfer. I can tell you right now, the 3 most miserable rounds of golf I've played were open courses a month before the Open. It was Wingfoot, it was Torrey Pines, and then it was Bethpage. And by the 12th or 13th hole, I was actually, truth be told, it was probably like the 7th hole, I was done. It was too hard, it was not fun, and I'm not that good a golfer. Never was. And if that's what you're trying to produce for your members, they may not be very happy. So most of the time, it's up to the golf course superintendent and possibly the committee, usually with guidelines from the committee, to figure out what is right for the golf course in terms of playability. And this is probably the most important thing the committee does. You know, set the tone, because if you think about the life cycle of your club, the committee hires the golf course superintendent, and then committee changes over the next few years. So the group that the golf course superintendent reports to is not the same group that he was hired by 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And so lots of people come onto the committee with the idea of, my gosh, we've got to make change. And so you've got an obvious disconnect right off the bat. So the superintendent and the committee have to figure out what's right for the golf course, what's right for their membership, their clientele, and go from there. And the way to start is by developing maintenance guidelines. Now, I would guess, show of hands, how many courses have maintenance guidelines that are represented in this room? Quite a few. Anybody not have maintenance guidelines? Okay, a couple. So if you don't have them, I would recommend getting them. It's a lot of work. Don't think you're going to start in, towards the end of March and do it, because it really takes a lot of time, a lot of thought. And if you do have them, you could certainly review them. Many courses put them together and then put them on the shelf and don't really use them. But they're a great tool for a variety of reasons. But basically, I think the simplest explanation is they are a philosophy of how you want your golf course maintained. And you should have guidance in the guidelines as to which side of the target you should err on, because golf courses are living entities and we are dealing with the weather. It's an outdoor game. You can't have perfect consistency every day of the year. Frankly, I don't know why anybody would want it. So those guidelines can help keep you on target, and they're a great way to diffuse arguments. So I think that's one of the most important and first tasks that a committee should look at. Review the guidelines that you have, see if they need to be tweaked. If you don't have them, look at getting them. Now, here's a big question. How big should the Green Committee be? Some people think it should be really big. A gentleman suggested to me many years ago it should be an odd number less than 3. And that works really well if you have the right individual. It doesn't work so well if you have the wrong individual. There is no magic number, but I think there's a strong correlation between large committees and dysfunctionality, if that's a word. I think an odd number, 5 to 7, is probably a good number. If you get much beyond that, it just gets unmanageable. It's like herding cats. And, the key is to get the right individuals and ones that can participate, that have time and are willing to commit. And this is a challenge because folks spend a lot of money to play golf. They spend a lot of money to join private clubs. They maybe don't really want to spend the time to be on a committee, even the Green Committee, which is really important. And to do it right, you have to spend time. I mean, you're evidence of this. You're all here, many superintendents and plenty of course officials, so you're getting some education to do your job better. And that's what it takes, a commitment to learn, a commitment to play the course and participate. It isn't an exclusive thing where only good players should be on the committee or only high handicappers. If you have the right individuals, it doesn't matter what handicap they have, but diversity is important in my book. And a working knowledge, just a sort of a general respect for hopefully the history of your golf course, a little bit about the history of the game, rules, etiquette, pace of play. It's not that you need to be an expert in any of these areas, but you have to understand what golf is and what it's supposed to be. I think the ideal Green Committee member has, really good listening skills and should be approachable. And so as you're looking at these points, think about yourself and think about other committee members that you work with or ones that you have worked with or known in the past. And I'm sure you'll have a smile or two come to your face when you think of some individuals. They're not really approachable. Hearing aids, I think, are very helpful because although it's very important to have good listening skills, there are some people that you just don't need to listen to. And if you have hearing aids, you can just walk away and without apparently, being rude and just claim that your hearing aid wasn't working. That's why you didn't hear what they had to say. And I say that, kind of half, in jest, but not really. As a committee member, you're going to invest a lot of time if you're going to be a good one. And you spend a lot of money to enjoy the facility. So you can't let everybody that has a complaint about an unfilled divot, an unrepaired ball mark, a piece of trash, a root, whatever, interrupt you and interrupt your enjoyment of the golf course. So I think the ideal solution is, if people have complaints, by golly, ask them to put them in writing. be polite about it, but don't listen to it while you're trying to warm up or hit balls or have lunch or what have you. That's rude and it's inappropriate. Now, some have placed their suggestion box in difficult to reach locations. I really wouldn't advocate this, but you know, the key is figuring out what's a good suggestion and what's not a good suggestion. So, yeah, listen, be approachable, be sure that you consider all perspectives, and you're going to get complaints, comments, recommendations, suggestions from Zoltar, the planet Zoltar, I'm sure. But you need to give them careful consideration before you file them in the round file. I think the key is the wisdom to differentiate between valid criticism and unreasonable expectations, and that takes some experience. And so don't feel like you need to respond to every comment that comes your way. Take it under advisement, and we'll take it to the committee. That's a great response. You can pass the question off to the superintendent and get some more feedback and get better background on how to answer certain challenging questions. I think as a chairman or a committee member, don't feel like you know everything. As a matter of fact, the committees and the committee personnel that get into trouble try to answer too many questions because they don't have all the facts. They don't really know why things are the way they are, and that's the superintendent's role. So don't feel like you need to know every single thing. And regardless if you're a low handicapper or a high handicapper, you really have to appreciate the perspective of a high handicapper. And that's one of the more common mistakes I think that has been made in the past. Courses that want to make the course tougher or want to make changes, they don't really see the impact on other types of golfers that certain changes in the golf course, architectural features, mowing lines, those sorts of things might have. And there are lots of examples. The other key things, yes, be tough, yes, be decisive. I think the key is being willing to take arrows. And this is a real tough time for golf courses, and nothing great has ever happened at a course without strong leadership. So you need to risk friendships sometimes. You need to be able to undergo incurring the wrath of some of your friends, some of the other golfers in the club, to do the right thing for everybody, for the advancement of your golf course, for the advancement of your facility. So that can be a tough thing. When there are really contentious issues, it can be an unenviable task being on a green committee or being a chairman. But these are the things that I think you ought to try to avoid. Features that single out and penalize one segment of the golfers. If it's a feature that singles out the short hitters and the high handicappers, that's not a good thing. Same thing is true of really good golfers. If you add a feature that makes it harder for the good players and easier for the short hitters, that may not be a good thing. But the reverse is almost always a bad thing. The feature that makes it harder for the high handicappers is not a good thing. So the game's already too hard for them. So green committee rules. Hey, number one, make sure it's fun. And I think that starts with checking the ego at the door. Being willing to learn. I think it's wonderful that we have so many course officials here today. And on the thumb drives that you're going to get at the end of the program today, there are a number of articles that pertain to all of our talks. There are several that pertain to green committees and green committee chairman, the role and those sorts of things, how they should function. But the key is being willing to learn. And the club invests a considerable amount of time in keeping golf course superintendents educated because, really by law, they have to continually go through continuing education. And the same is true of green committees, although it's not a law. You're here, you're incurring expense for your club. As you become a more effective and a better educated committee member, you become a real asset to the golf course. So being willing to learn is what makes you a valuable asset. Oh, and by the way, the comment about, well, I've been a golfer for 30 years, I know good conditions when I see them. Being a good golfer, being a golfer for a long period of time doesn't really qualify you to be on a green committee because you're going to have to look at things through a very, very different set of eyes. It's a great background to be on a committee, but that in itself is not enough. You need to learn why things are the way they are, and you're going to learn most of that from your golf course superintendent. I think with respect to the committee, more really importantly, with respect to the golf course, don't try to be something you're not. And okay, we have Augusta right around the corner, so pretty much the 3 weeks after the Masters is played, we field questions on our course consulting service visits about azaleas and planting them behind this green or that tee because we want to be just like Augusta. I think we all recognize there's only one Augusta, and when you try to be something you're not, when you try to make your golf course something it's not, you wind up creating problems, and you wind up spending a lot of money, and it's usually not well spent. Don't get sucked into doing things just because you can do them. You know, you may have the money to stripe your roughs or stripe your fairways or put planters all over the place, but that's not something that really adds to the golf course playability, the playability of the golf course. So don't get tricked into trying things, doing things that you've seen at other courses and you think it's really cool there. Maybe it's appropriate at that golf course. Azaleas certainly and rhododendrons certainly are appropriate at Augusta, but probably not so appropriate at your golf course. So some examples, you know, this is certainly not Augusta. This is a kind of a low budget golf course in upstate New York. And if you look closely at that picture, you'll see 5 staff and it's all in one garden and it's on the golf course and they barely have enough time to get the greens and fairways mowed, rolled every day. So to spend all this time and labor, all these resources on a garden really just doesn't make any sense. There are so many other things that they could invest that time and money and labor in that would have a tangible impact on the playability of the golf course, the health of the turf, those sorts of things. It's really, this is misspent time. You know, some courses like the stream banks, the pond banks mowed right down to the edge, and some will call that the Augusta look. I think it's just what everybody did 25 years ago. And then we realized through research, through observation, that gee whiz, if you let the pond banks grow, you wind up doing a lot of good. Number one, the clippings don't go in the water, and they contribute to degrading water quality. When the vegetation is longer along the stream bank, it slows water flow, so that helps to reduce erosion. When the vegetation is longer, it also prevents the water from scouring the soil, so that reduces erosion. And when you have longer vegetation and different types of vegetation, you have root systems that are deeper and of varying depths, and that further reduces erosion. So yeah, you may like the look of the turf cut really short leading down to the water, but it's a lot of labor, it's not good for water quality, it's going to cause erosion, and it's not good environmentally because of the degradation of water quality, and it's, at the end of the day, it's probably going to cost you a lot more money in restoring the stream bank. Years ago, I wrote an article about this subject, and it was one course in Canada that was getting ready to do a multi-million-dollar stream bank restoration project, and as they were considering this, I said, you know, why don't you just quit string trimming everything down really low? This is probably about 20 years ago. And the superintendent took that idea and ran with it, and he also put in a lot of native plants. He actually bought out a native plant nursery that was going out of business. And he also looked through the history of their club and the old maintenance reports. And it turns out most of their erosion problems started a few years earlier when they bought a bunch of string trimmers and started cutting the banks down really short. Now this is a pretty good sized body of water that had rapid flow in the winter and early spring with the melt. So they had major erosion problems, but by eliminating this process, they pretty much fixed their erosion problems and wound up not going through that major channelization project that would have cost millions of dollars. So the other thing I think you need to do is develop a plan. And I already mentioned maintenance standards, and that's the key that you base everything on. But then you need a longer range plan for the golf course, and that could be pretty involved. I think you start by evaluating current conditions and future needs, and you need to think about infrastructure. People get very excited about, oh, we're going to do an architectural plan, we're going to redo bunkers, we're going to add tees, we're going to rebuild greens or what have you, and they sometimes forget the infrastructure, the stuff that you can't see, such as irrigation systems, drainage, maintenance facilities. very difficult to get golf courses to spend money on infrastructure things that you can't see. Much easier to get them to spend money on things they can see, that the golfers at least perceive they're deriving direct benefit from. But if you don't have the infrastructure, nothing else really works very well. So lots of goals could be included. Maybe you want to reduce your liability. That's certainly always a worthwhile goal. Consistent improvement, continuity, all those things. Increased sustainability is increasingly important, I think, because golf course maintenance costs continue to rise, and any way we can keep them in check is worth consideration. You know, you don't have to develop a timeline, but it's a good idea to think about it. You know, at least prioritize and think that, develop a plan where you might be able to get to these different items. That's always subject to economic changes. But I would look at all your major features, the ones you think about and the ones that you don't. Now, again, architectural design, lots of courses have master plans. Some courses have multiple versions of master plans. Many times they're purchased and put on a shelf. But you also need a plan for fixing other areas, the infrastructure things, irrigation and drainage. You need a plan for your trees. I would argue you need a master plan for almost everything on this list. A plan for upgrading your practice facilities. We've talked about that in past Green Chairman seminars. It's really popular to upgrade practice facilities. People don't have time to play 9 or 18 holes sometimes, but they love to practice. So having a plan for the time when you have monies available to upgrade your practice facility is a great idea. You need a master plan for your maintenance facility. If it's older than 15 to 20 years, it's probably out of date. And some of the maintenance facilities I see are much older than that, and they're really out of date. So that impacts your costs, it impacts your liability, impacts the efficiency of the golf course maintenance operation, equipment life, all those sorts of things. So it's a big number, and it's a big infrastructure item, but it's a very important one. And maybe you can't rebuild it or replace it, but just upgrading it can be a big help. And then always think about the environmental impact of what you're doing. You know, is it going to have a good, a positive, or a negative, or maybe a neutral impact on the environmental aspects? You know, I think that's a key point. You should have a separate plan for a lot of these different things. I think it's very important not to create any more problems. So when you redo something, don't build in additional maintenance problems. And the general premise of trying to eliminate overindulgent cosmetics, frog rocks and the like, that's a really worthwhile target. This will not get me points with some people, but I don't like to see flower beds on golf courses, hedges, shrubs, all those sorts of things, even if they're perennials, because they take up time, they take up labor, they take up money. My degree was horticulture. I don't dislike flowers, I don't dislike ornamental plantings. My suggestion is keep them around the clubhouse where you can contain their costs and not suck important resources away from things that really matter in terms of playability and the golf course setup. Okay, beware of the chairman architect. Now, this is my answer to the frog rock, and this is not from a course in this area. But to set this up, this individual is on a green committee at a golf course. He's an educated individual, and he submitted this quote-unquote architectural rendering for his suggestion of what they should do to this golf hole. And then he presented it to the committee. Thankfully, I wasn't there because I wouldn't have been able to hold back. I would have grabbed my sides and started laughing. This is a pen and ink. It looks like crayons. I think my kids could have done better when they were 5 or 6. But this gentleman thought he was going to be a golf course architect, and he had solved the problems with this hole and all the traffic flow. So don't be that guy. Chairman architects have a long and illustrious history of causing problems. Whatever the plan is, stick with it. And that's one of the challenges, I think, when you have committees that are constantly turning over. Continuity is very important. And I would argue that most of the time, if not all the time, the green chairman should come from the committee, should spend a year or 2 or more on the committee just to learn the background, to start the education process. And committee chairman and committee members both, I think, should have multiple years on the committee. You know, there's such a thing as, well, yes, we need some new blood. But if a course spends the time and money to educate and get these individuals experienced so that they become valuable members of the committee, you don't want to lose them after a year or two, because it starts the whole education process all over again. So continuity on the committee is really important. And this is an amazing thing. We were doing the planning meeting for this educational meeting, and one of the superintendents present made the comment that he did not attend board meetings. And then the question went around, and it turns out most of the clubs represented at that meeting, their superintendent did not attend board meetings. Now, hopefully they attend all the Green Committee meetings. I can't imagine having a Green Committee meeting without the one individual that really knows what the heck's going on. But I'm not saying the golf course superintendent should attend the board meeting, the entirety of every board meeting, but any aspect that pertains to the golf course superintendent should be there, because nobody can explain what's going on better than he or she can. So it's mind-boggling to me that superintendents, and I apologize to the superintendents present, because that's another meeting that you should go to now. But the truth is, you can't plead your case, no one can plead your case better than you can. So there's some famous new committee member quotes that I've collected. When are you going to speed the greens up? Of course, this comes out from a lot of golfers, which is quickly followed by, hey, we got to do something about the pace of play, okay? There's a lot of things that we can do, and one of them is maintain greens faster, but that's not necessarily a good thing, and it's not necessarily the right thing. So don't get tricked into doing things because you can do it. Now, on the USGA website, there is a whole section for golf course officials, course committees, and I would encourage you to go there. So you start by going to www.usga.org, go to the course care section, scroll down and go to the course official, and there are loads of articles, the ones that I have included in your thumb drive later on, as well as a few others, and lots of other information on the site. One of the articles you're going to get is this one, and I actually wrote this a few years ago. It was the 10 most common Green Committee mistakes. And for the sake of time, I'm not going through them one by one, but poor communication and short tenure are the two biggest issues with Green Committees. I've seen some courses that have a new chairman every year. I can't imagine how you could ever develop any kind of continuity with that sort of a situation. But all these things are pertain to some of the committee folks that I've seen over the years and some of the ineffective committees that I've dealt with over the years. So this is number one on your read list, right behind the Green Section Committee Guide. And this is number one, the Guide for Green Committee Members. This was first written probably in the 1950s. It's been redone a few times over the years. It was redone in last year, I believe, 2014. This really gives you a lot of information on the types of things that committees should and should not do. So I would encourage you to read that. Now, I just want to end with an agronomic topic, because we've already talked to a bunch of people this morning about the possibility of winter injury. Last week, I attended a seminar, golf course superintendent seminar in New Jersey, and did a whole presentation on winter injury. And as you probably know, last year, this time, to steal a phrase, there was carnage everywhere. Last year was the second worst winter I've ever seen in terms of turf loss in the Northeast region in the last 25, 27 years. The worst year was 1994. We had an ice storm in the spring that year, and you could have ice skated pretty much from Maryland to Rhode Island, or maybe even Massachusetts. There was literally a solid sheet of ice all up and down the East Coast. It wreaked havoc. Last year, it wasn't so bad down here, but as you got to the upper Midwest, upstate New York, New England, southern Canada, it was extraordinary. Acres and acres and acres and acres of turf loss. Courses that lost 80, 90+% of their putting green turf and acres of fairway turf. So we're not that bad this year, but quite honestly, I don't think we know how bad we are. There is damage in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, all the New England states, and yes, again, poor guys up in southern Canada. To date, it looks like it's only greens affected, maybe the odd collar or two. The turf actually went into the winter in pretty good shape. It was hardened off, and we had very cold temperatures, but we had a melt in February, I think, and then a refreeze. And so if your turf snow conditions melted and refroze, created an ice layer, that could have caused problems, but just the actual melting and refreezing causes damage. So I'm not going to go through the whole scenario of, what is winter damage, how you can prevent it. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But the key point that you should know is that it's really only affecting Poa annua bluegrass. If you have pure bentgrass greens in this area, you should hope for winter damage because it kills Poa and it doesn't kill bentgrass. Now, if you get far enough north in New England, you get far enough north in Canada, winter injury will cause damage to bentgrass, even Kentucky bluegrass, but here, those grasses are virtually immune. It'll take out Poa and it'll take out ryegrass. And given the relative importance of greens, we're obviously way more concerned with those. And because of the height of the cut and other various factors, greens are absolutely the most susceptible area on your golf course. Greens in poor growing environments are the most susceptible for a couple of reasons. They have more Poa on them by definition. They have more winter shade. Most people don't think about winter shade being an issue because obviously the turf isn't growing, but winter shade keeps snow and ice on the greens longer, and when it's slower to melt, you're more likely to have freeze-thaw cycles, and that's what causes probably 95% of the turf damage in this area. So winter shade, and then poor drainage, poor internal drainage and poor surface drainage. You can sort of see from this image there's a depression on that green where the soil's frozen so it can't drain. All the snow and ice have collected there, and that's going to sit there and freeze and thaw, and pretty much everything in that area is going to get smoked. So what I think you will see on most of your greens if you have damage are just low areas, but there might be the odd area where it's a high spot. You're only going to see Poa damage, and so the number one solution to winter damage is don't have so much Poa. If you have 60 or 70% bent, it's a problem, but it's not such a big problem. If you have 100% Poa, it's a really big problem. If you have 100% bent, it's a good thing. You should hope for it. I would say almost all the damage was probably caused by crown hydration. That's what usually does it. So how would you improve your rods? Well, obviously I've already given you a clue. More bent grass. And regrassing isn't going to be appropriate for everybody, but most courses do have the ability to promote more bent grass. There are lots of things you can do to encourage bent grass population increases. It's not easy, but it can be done. Improve drainage. Now, last year was the first year I ever saw greens with significantly better internal drainage have significantly less damage than greens literally right next door that didn't have such good internal drainage. It is not a guarantee by any means, but it improves your chances. Surface drainage, if you have poor surface drainage, surface depressions where water will collect and refreeze, that's the kiss of death. If you have greens that are big and slope all the same direction, maybe throw in a little winter shade, such that everything at the back of the green has to melt and flow all the way off the front, are more at risk because it takes longer for those greens to melt off and you're more likely to have one of those freeze-thaw cycles. Some of the other things you can do is promote turf health earlier in the fall. Talked about this a lot last year. Raising cutting height sooner so that the turf can store more carbohydrates is really important. Again, it's not a guarantee, it just improves your odds a little bit. There's a correlation between keeping greens shorter, longer, and having more injury. And then really the other thing is monitor throughout the winter. And this is something that everybody does up north. We don't do so much down here. It's a pain in the neck. That means going out, shoveling off areas on greens, maybe breaking through ice layers, have a battery operated drill with a hole saw, take plugs out of the greens, bring them in and incubate them. And then you can get an idea of whether you have damage, whether you don't have damage, whether it's extensive or not. It also, more importantly, gives you information as to whether you should undertake aggressive action such as removing snow or ice layers. So it's a little more complicated than that. I won't go into any greater detail, but monitoring is always a good thing. The question I always get is, oh my gosh, such and such a course, they covered their greens, they had no damage. Well, covering your greens in this area means covering with permeable covers that are going to let air through and are going to let water through. On balance, they really don't have much of an impact on the incidence of winter injury. The odd course, you'll have less injury because they were covered, but just as frequently you'll see increased damage because they were covered. And if you wonder why, well, if you have a cover, it warms things up, it melts things out, it melts things, and then, so if you encourage a melt and then get a refreeze, the cover could actually work against you. But they're wonderful for recovery, promoting recovery. They're great if you have desiccation injuries, desiccation problems, but that's not so common in this part of the country. And they're, at the end of the day, I would call them an added expense and another complication. So not something that's really going to help you too much with crown hydration. So the most important thing, I guess, quickly on the road to recovery, assess and communicate. We really don't know how extensive the damage is in this area because the turf hasn't started to grow. But I will give you this scenario, and I've heard it already several times this year and many, many times in past years. The snow and ice melts, greens clear off, the putting surfaces are bright green and appear healthy, and then they go downhill over the next 2 weeks and go completely brown. Some of the turf may be fine, it's just acclimating to the cold temperatures that they're exposed to, the wind, it's drying out. In some case, the turf is dead. Well, how can that happen? It was green when everything melted off. Well, think about it, snow and ice will preserve chlorophyll. So you could have greens that are stone dead, but you won't know it until they don't grow a few weeks after they uncover from snow and ice. I've heard several reports of that. So there's a million ways to seed your greens. I'm not going to go into that. Obviously, you're going to fertilize them, plug them, and I can't recommend this enough. Hopefully you don't need any sod, but 3-inch pluggers, you can put a bunch of healthy turf plugs in damaged areas. It helps raise the cutting height. It helps protect the seedlings that hopefully will be coming up after you've seeded. And it will help take some traffic pressure off the other turf, which is hanging on by a thread. Right now, we don't know if how much is dead and how much is just kind of hanging on. If you get real aggressive too quickly, you can push some weak turf over the edge. So, wait till you can get a feel for whether it's injured or okay. Cultivate, seed, get them covered, and do all the plugging. But the big thing is, and this is what nobody in this room wants to hear, is keep your greens closed. And that's a tough pill to swallow. Everybody's got cabin fever, but I can tell you, promise you, that greens that are open when they're thin and weak and damaged will take at least twice as long, maybe more, to recover. And the recovery won't be as strong because you can seed all the bent grass you want. It's slow to germinate. It's slow to establish. It's very susceptible to wear injury. You subject it to a lot of traffic, most of it won't survive. And so at the end of this disruptive process, you could be better off by having new and improved bent grass varieties established in your greens if you keep them closed, or you could be worse off by having more lousy, weaker new POAs come back in because you were impatient and opened them too early. So I know that's going to make people very unhappy. Golfers are going to be unhappy with you, and you won't be happy. But that is the most important thing I could recommend. Keep them closed until they're recovered, and do the plugging. I know it looks like hair clip for men. It's not very attractive, but it's a wonderful way to stimulate recovery when the damage is isolated. I should preface that by saying, don't think if you've got 18 dead greens, you're going to plug them all like this. I don't know where you'll get the turf. This is for when you have isolated pockets of damage. So with that, I think I'm pretty much on time. I'll say thank you, and I'll turn it back to Phil.